The evening started like any other for the young waitress who had been working at the small diner for years. The neon sign outside flickered as she wiped down the tables, preparing for another slow shift. The diner wasn't fancy, but it was a place where truck drivers, students, and tired workers came in to grab a quick meal. She had long gotten used to the routine: take orders, serve plates, collect bills, and smile even when her feet ached. Life wasn't easy for her. The tips barely covered her rent, and there were nights she went home with only enough to pay for groceries. Yet, she carried on with a quiet strength, telling herself that being kind cost nothing, even when life gave her very little in return. That night, just as she was checking the coffee pot, the door creaked open and an elderly man stepped inside. He walked slowly, leaning on a worn wooden cane, and his movements showed that each step was an effort. His back was slightly bent, his face pale, and his hands trembled as he held onto the counter for support. The diner wasn't crowded, but no one offered him help. A couple of people glanced his way, then turned back to their conversations. Some looked uncomfortable, as if helping him would be an inconvenience. The waitress noticed right away and felt a tug at her heart. She quickly hurried over with a warm smile and asked if he needed help finding a seat. The man nodded, his voice weak, and she gently guided him toward a booth near the window. She pulled out the chair carefully so he wouldn't have to struggle. The man lowered himself down with difficulty, letting out a small sigh of relief. She placed a menu in front of him, but noticed how his hands shook as he tried to hold it. Without making him feel embarrassed, she leaned down and softly asked if he'd like her to read out the specials for him. He smiled faintly and agreed. As she listed off the choices, he seemed undecided, and she could see his eyes darting between the menu and her face, as though he wasn't just choosing food but also measuring whether she truly cared. In the end, he quietly asked for a simple bowl of soup. She walked back to the kitchen, ignoring the whispers of two young men at the counter who chuckled and muttered that he probably wouldn't tip. Their laughter made her heart tighten, but she kept her focus on the old man. She knew kindness wasn't about what you received in return, but about what you gave in the moment. When the soup was ready, she brought it over, setting it gently on the table. She noticed him struggle with the spoon, his hand trembling so badly that drops spilled back into the bowl. Without a second thought, she leaned over and asked if he would like her to help cut the bread into smaller pieces so it would be easier. His eyes softened, and for a moment he looked as if he might cry. He nodded slowly, whispering his thanks. She cut the bread neatly, placed it beside his bowl, and even adjusted the spoon so it sat more comfortably in his hand. As he ate slowly, she checked in on him often, making sure his water was filled and that he was comfortable. She treated him with the same respect she would show any other customer, perhaps even more so because she could feel the loneliness around him. Most people saw only his frailty, but she saw the dignity he carried quietly, even while struggling. Each time she came to the table, he met her with grateful eyes, as though no one had shown him such simple patience in a long time. When he finished his meal, he carefully reached into his pocket and pulled out a few crumpled bills. She noticed his hand shake as he placed them on the table. It wasn't much, but she didn't care about the amount. She smiled warmly, telling him that his presence alone had brightened her evening. The man looked at her for a long moment, then said in a soft voice that people often looked past him these days, as though he no longer mattered. But she had treated him as though he still did, and for that he was deeply thankful. He slowly stood up, leaning on his cane again, and she walked him to the door. The cool night air brushed against them as she opened it for him. Before stepping out, he paused and looked back at her. There was something almost unspoken in his gaze, as though he wanted to say more, but chose to keep it to himself. With a faint smile, he whispered another thank you and disappeared into the night. The waitress stood by the door for a moment, watching him go, her heart heavy yet strangely warm. To her, it had been nothing more than common decency, the way she wished others would treat her own grandparents if they were still alive. She didn't expect recognition, nor did she think about whether her kindness would return to her one day. She simply believed that helping someone, even in the smallest way, was worth it. As she returned inside, her co-workers gave her knowing looks, one of them joking about how she had wasted time on a man who wouldn't even remember her name tomorrow. She just smiled faintly and said nothing. Deep down, she knew they were wrong. She felt that what she had done mattered, even if only to one person. Little did she know, that simple act of kindness had set in motion a chain of events that would soon change her life in ways she never imagined. That night, when the waitress finally returned home, the memory of the old man lingered in her mind. She lived in a small apartment, the kind where every creak in the floorboard reminded her of how thin the walls were. She changed out of her work uniform and sat by the window, sipping tea from a chipped mug. Outside, the street was quiet, lit only by a flickering lamp. Normally, she would distract herself by scrolling through her phone or making a quick list of bills she needed to pay, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the frail man who had struggled to even lift a spoon. She wondered how many people like him walked through life unnoticed, dismissed as if they were invisible. The way some customers had turned away, the laughter she overheard from her co-workers, those things gnawed at her. She thought about her grandmother, who had been kind and gentle, and how she used to say, "The way you treat the weakest shows the kind of person you are." Those words came back to her strongly now, and she felt a sense of peace knowing she had done the right thing. The next morning, she returned to the diner for another long shift. The neon lights buzzed faintly, the coffee aroma filled the air, and the regular customers sat in their usual spots. Everything seemed ordinary. She moved between tables, balancing plates and cups, her smile hiding the weariness she felt. At one point, a coworker nudged her playfully, teasing her about babysitting the old man the night before. The joke stung, but she didn't show it. She simply said, "Kindness doesn't cost anything," and walked away to refill a customer's coffee. What she didn't know was that miles away, the elderly man she had helped was sitting in a large home, his son by his side. The man's health had been fragile for years, and most people around him treated him with politeness but little patience. But that night at the diner, something had felt different. He told his son about the waitress, the way she had looked him in the eye, the way she had spoken to him without pity, the way she made him feel human again. His voice shook as he repeated her words, his face lighting up with an energy his son hadn't seen in a long time. The son listened carefully. He was used to his father talking about how the world had changed, how people no longer showed kindness, but this story was different. He could hear the sincerity in his father's voice. His father said, "It wasn't just the soup. It wasn't the bread she cut for me. It was how she treated me. Like I mattered." Those words struck the son deeply. He had grown up seeing his father command boardrooms, run companies, and be respected everywhere. Yet here was the same man, touched to the core by a waitress in a small diner, for the son, who was busy with wealth and responsibilities. It was a reminder of something he had forgotten. Real kindness cannot be bought. It comes from the heart. His father leaned back in his chair, his eyes moist, and urged him to meet the young woman. "You should go," the old man said softly. "People like her, they are rare. I want her to know how much it meant." The son agreed, though he was curious. What could a simple diner waitress have done that left such a mark on his father? He promised to visit her the next day. In his mind, he planned to thank her, but part of him already felt it wouldn't be enough. Back at the diner, the waitress carried on as usual. She didn't know that her small act of compassion had stirred something in the heart of a man whose influence stretched far beyond what she could imagine. As the night grew late, she walked home again under the dim glow of the streetlights. She unlocked her apartment door, slipped inside, and set her bag down on the counter. She was too tired to cook, so she poured herself a bowl of cereal and sat at the table. Life felt ordinary, predictable. She had no idea that her world was about to change. The thought never crossed her mind that someone, at that very moment, was preparing to knock on her door, not out of obligation, but because of the way she had chosen to treat a stranger. To her, it had been a simple act of kindness. To him, it was unforgettable. The old man, before going to bed that night, whispered a quiet prayer of thanks for the young woman. In his heart, he knew she had restored something. He had lost faith in people. He closed his eyes with a smile, comforted by the thought that kindness was still alive in the world. And while he slept peacefully, his son was already making plans. By the following evening, the waitress would hear an unexpected knock that would leave her stunned, and nothing in her life would ever be quite the same again. The following evening was colder than usual, and the waitress pulled her jacket tighter as she walked back to her small apartment after another long shift at the diner. The streets were quiet, only the occasional car passing by, headlights sweeping over the cracked sidewalks. She felt exhausted, her legs heavy from standing all day, and her mind was already drifting to how she would heat up leftovers for dinner. To her, it was just another ordinary night in a life that often felt predictable and heavy with routine. She climbed the stairs to her apartment and unlocked the door. The place was dimly lit, with a small lamp in the corner casting a soft glow over the modest furniture. She set her bag down and let out a long breath, grateful to finally be home. She slipped off her shoes, rubbed her sore feet, and started toward the kitchen. Just as she reached for the fridge, a sudden knock echoed through the apartment. Her heart skipped. She wasn't expecting anyone. She froze, glancing at the clock. It was late, far too late for visitors. The knock came again, firm but not aggressive, just enough to stir unease. For a moment, she wondered if it was a neighbor with a problem, or maybe the landlord coming by unexpectedly. Wiping her hands on her apron, she walked slowly toward the door. Through the peephole, she saw a figure standing outside. A tall man in a dark coat, his posture straight, and behind him, through the narrow view, she could just make out the polished shine of a sleek car parked at the curb. Her eyebrows furrowed. She didn't recognize him. He didn't look like anyone who lived nearby. Cautiously, she opened the door just a few inches. The man turned his head toward her, his expression calm but serious. "Good evening," he said politely. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." She hesitated, gripping the edge of the door. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice unsure. The man nodded slightly. "You don't know me, but you met my father last night. He told me about you, the way you helped him at the diner." Her mind raced. The old man with the cane. She remembered his frail hands, the way his eyes had softened when she treated him kindly. Her chest tightened as she whispered, "Your father. He came in for soup." "Yes," the man said gently. "He couldn't stop talking about you. He told me how you treated him, how much it meant to him. I wanted to thank you personally." She blinked, not knowing what to say. It felt strange that something so small, helping a customer with a meal, had led to this stranger standing at her door. She finally opened it wider, though still cautious. "You didn't have to come all this way," she said softly. "I was just doing my job." The man gave a faint smile, but there was a weight behind his eyes. To you, maybe it was nothing. But to him, it was everything. For the first time, she took a better look at him. His suit was tailored, his shoes polished, and there was a quiet confidence in the way he carried himself. He didn't seem like an ordinary visitor. When her gaze drifted back to the luxury car parked outside, realization began to sink in. This wasn't just someone thanking her. There was more to the story. "I don't understand," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The man hesitated before answering. "My father isn't just an old man in need of kindness. He's someone with means, someone who isn't used to being treated the way you treated him. Most people see only his weakness. But you saw him as a person. That's rare." The words left her speechless. She felt her cheeks flush, embarrassed by the attention. I didn't do anything special, she murmured. Anyone would have done the same, but he shook his head slowly. No, most people wouldn't, and that's why I'm here. The silence between them stretched for a moment, the sound of a car passing in the distance filling the air. She could feel her heart pounding, unsure where this conversation was leading. Part of her wanted to close the door and retreat back to her safe, quiet world. Another part of her felt an unfamiliar pull, curiosity mixed with unease. Finally the man said, "May I come in?" "Just for a moment." "I promise I mean no harm. I only want to talk." She hesitated, her mind racing through the possibilities. Everything about him seemed genuine, and something deep inside told her he wasn't lying. With a slow breath, she nodded and stepped aside. He entered quietly, his presence filling the small apartment in a way that made the space feel even smaller. As he looked around at the modest furniture, the worn couch, and the chipped mug still sitting on the table, she felt suddenly self-conscious. But he didn't comment. Instead, he turned back to her and said softly, "You don't realize the impact you had on my father. You gave him something money can't buy: respect, dignity, hope." Her throat tightened, and she looked down at her hands. It was hard to believe that such a small act could carry so much weight. She had done it without thinking, without expecting anything in return. And yet here she was, standing in her little apartment with a man whose world was clearly far removed from hers. What she didn't know was that this meeting was only the beginning. The knock on her door that night was not just about thanks. It was about to open a chapter in her life she never imagined, a chapter that would test her heart and bring changes she could never have predicted. The room felt strangely quiet after the man spoke, as though his words carried a weight that pressed into the walls themselves. The waitress stood there, unsure of what to say, her hands fidgeting nervously with the edge of her apron. She never imagined that serving soup and cutting bread for a frail old man would lead to his son standing in her living room. Something about his presence felt different, heavier, as though there was far more to this visit than a simple thank you. The man took a seat at her small table, resting his hands neatly in front of him. He studied her for a moment, not in a cold way, but with genuine curiosity. "I should probably tell you something," he began, his voice calm yet firm. "My father isn't just any elderly man. He's someone who has lived a life where people often saw his money before they saw him. And now in his old age, they see only his weakness. You were different. You reminded him of something he thought was lost." She shifted uncomfortably, still unsure where this was going. "I just treated him like I would want anyone to treat my family," she said, softly. "That's exactly why it meant so much," the man replied. "You didn't see a burden. You didn't see a rich man. You saw a person. That's rare." The waitress lowered her eyes, embarrassed. She didn't think kindness deserved this much attention. In her mind, it was natural to help someone struggling. But clearly to them, it was more than that. The man leaned back slightly, and for the first time, she noticed the subtle details of his suit, the expensive watch on his wrist, the way everything about him spoke of wealth and influence. Her heart skipped. He wasn't just well-dressed, he belonged to a world far above her own. She finally asked, her voice hesitant, "Who are you?" He looked at her steadily and answered without hesitation. "I run several companies. Some call me successful, others call me fortunate. I don't care much for titles, but yes, I am a billionaire." The word billionaire hung in the air like a shockwave. She blinked, almost laughing in disbelief. Her modest apartment with its faded curtains and second-hand furniture seemed to shrink in comparison to what she imagined his life must be. Like mansions, private cars, boardrooms filled with powerful people. And here he was, sitting at her tiny table as if the gap between their worlds didn't matter. She stammered, "I don't understand why you're here. People like you. You don't need to come to someone like me." His gaze softened. "That's exactly why I'm here. Because it isn't about what I need. It's about what you gave my father. You gave him dignity. You gave him something I couldn't buy with all the money in the world." Her chest tightened, and she shook her head. "I really don't think I did anything that special." He leaned forward, his voice steady and sincere. "Do you know how many people ignored him that night? How many turned away, pretending not to see his struggle? And yet you walked toward him. You offered patience, respect, and care. You may think it was small, but to my father, it was everything. To me, it was a reminder that kindness still exists in its purest form." Her eyes grew moist, and she quickly brushed a hand across them, embarrassed. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he assured her. "But I do have one question." She looked up cautiously. "What are your dreams?" He asked simply. The question caught her off guard. She had spent so long just trying to survive paying rent, working double shifts, counting coins for groceries, that she hadn't allowed herself to dream much. Her lips parted, but no words came at first. After a long pause, she whispered, "I guess. I've always wanted a better life. Maybe my own cafe one day, a place where people could feel at home. But dreams like that, they don't come true for people like me." The man studied her expression, and for the first time, a small smile curved his lips. "You'd be surprised." She laughed nervously, shaking her head. "I can't imagine someone like you caring about my little dream." But he answered firmly, "You're wrong. I care because my father asked me to." He said, "Find that young woman. Let her know she is rare. Do something for her, and I intend to honor that." Her eyes widened, her breath catching in her chest. She had no idea what he meant, but there was a sincerity in his voice that made her believe him. The thought of someone so powerful taking interest in her life was overwhelming. "You don't owe me anything," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Perhaps not," he replied softly. "But kindness should never go unanswered. My father believes, and I agree, that sometimes the smallest acts deserve the biggest gratitude." For a long moment, the two sat in silence, the distance between their worlds slowly shrinking. She realized this wasn't just about money, or wealth, or charity. It was about a man honoring his father's heart and a waitress discovering that her simple compassion had touched lives far beyond what she imagined. That night, as he left her apartment and stepped back into his car, she stood at the door watching the taillights fade into the dark street. Her mind swirled with confusion, disbelief, and a strange sense of hope she hadn't felt in years. She didn't know what would happen next, but something told her that her life was no longer as ordinary as it had once seemed. The next few days passed in a blur for the waitress. She kept going to work as usual, serving plates of pancakes, filling coffee cups, and smiling at customers who barely noticed her tired eyes. But her heart was restless. Every time she wiped down a table or refilled a glass, her mind drifted back to the late-night visit from the billionaire son. His words kept echoing in her head. He had asked her about her dreams, and she had spoken them out loud, something she hadn't done in years. The thought that he might actually care seemed impossible. Still, part of her wondered if she had imagined it all, if maybe her exhaustion had made the moment feel larger than it was. After all, people from his world didn't linger in small apartments like hers. Maybe it was just a polite gesture, a courtesy to honor his father's request. She told herself not to expect anything more. Life had taught her to keep her hopes small. Disappointment was easier that way, but fate had other plans. 3 evenings later, just as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, there was another knock at her door. Her heart skipped as she rushed to open it. Standing there was the elderly man, leaning on his cane, his face lit with a gentle smile. Beside him stood his son, once again in his tailored suit, but this time his expression was lighter, almost excited. "Good evening," the son said warmly. "May we come in?" She quickly nodded, stepping aside. The old man moved slowly into the room, his eyes scanning the modest apartment, before settling on her with warmth. "I had to see you again," he said softly. "The other night, I didn't get to tell you enough." She hurried to help him sit down, making sure he was comfortable. "You don't need to thank me," she insisted gently. "It was nothing." The old man chuckled faintly, shaking his head. "To you, maybe. But to me, it was everything. I haven't felt that kind of respect in a long time. People often look through me now, but you didn't. You looked at me. You saw me." Her eyes grew moist as she listened. She had never thought a simple act could mean so much. The son then stepped forward, carrying a brown envelope. He placed it on the table between them. "My father and I talked," he explained. "And we agreed that we cannot let your kindness go unnoticed. You told me about your dream. Well, I think it's time someone believed in it." Confused, she reached for the envelope, opening it slowly. Inside were papers, official documents, and a check with numbers so large her hands trembled as she held it. Her eyes widened, disbelief flooding her. "I don't understand," she whispered. The billionaire smiled gently. "This is a lease for a small cafe space downtown. Renovations, equipment, and initial costs are all covered. Consider it a gift from us. A thank you for the way you reminded us what real humanity looks like." Her breath caught, tears spilling freely now. "I can't accept this. It's too much." But the old man reached across the table, his frail hand covering hers. "Please," he said with a trembling voice. "You gave me dignity when no one else did. You gave me kindness with no expectation in return. Let us give you this, not as charity, but as gratitude." Her chest tightened, her emotions overwhelming her. For so long she had worked endless shifts, convincing herself that dreams were for other people. And now, here she was, being offered the chance to turn her dream into reality. She had no words, only tears and quiet thanks spilling from her lips. The son leaned back, watching her with a smile. "This isn't just about helping you. It's about honoring what you gave us. My father reminded me that money is only powerful when used to do good. And you reminded us both that true kindness is priceless." The old man nodded, his eyes shining with tears. "People like you make the world better. Never stop being who you are." For a long while, the three of them sat together in the small apartment, a strange but beautiful gathering of lives that had crossed by chance. A waitress from a humble diner, an elderly man searching for dignity, and his billionaire son who had been reminded of what mattered most. That night, after they left, she sat alone at her table staring at the papers and the check. Her hands still shook, her heart still raced, but deep down she felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Real hope, she whispered to herself. Maybe dreams do come true. Maybe kindness really does come back. Weeks later, the cafe opened its doors. It wasn't grand or flashy, but it was hers. The walls carried warmth, the tables invited conversation, and the smell of fresh coffee and baked bread filled the air. Customers came in, some curious, some regulars, and she greeted each one with the same smile she had given the old man that night at the diner. On the wall near the counter, she placed a small framed note that read, "Kindness is never wasted. It always finds its way back." And whenever she looked at it, she thought of the knock on her door, the frail hand of the old man, and the quiet gratitude that had changed her life forever.